So the story is around Layman Pang's daughter Lingzhao, for those who are coming in a few minutes into the talk. And my story was that I was going for a walk on New Year's Day, and we decided to do that thing, like start how you mean to go on. We were full of good intentions that our New Year should look like this with exercise in it. And we went for what turned out to be an utterly dreary and pointless walk. So it's one of those walks where you're walking around thinking, why? What are we doing this for? Anyway, we were nearly back to the car after this really dreary and very muddy, very not pleasant particular walk. And my boots had got caked in mud, and I was on a slight slope, and my feet just went right out from under me, and I crashed down, really landed hard. And Josh didn't throw himself down beside me, but there were some walkers behind us, and they rushed up, and they grabbed me by the armpits, and they were trying to haul me up. And Josh, who knows me very well, was like, leave her alone. It's not my preferred thing to be helped in that way. And he managed to persuade them that I was quite happy in the mud, and I wanted to stay there till I kind of had an idea about what was happening. So they walked on, and I lay in the mud for a while, and gathered myself and thought, oh yeah, I've done something. So I knew I'd done something to my wrist. But it was like I needed to just take my time, and that I actually felt interfered with by the helping, not actually supported. And the supportive thing was to basically leave me alone, which often is the supportive thing for me. But I was really struck by that being interfered with, by people feeling that they're helping, and not actually paying attention to what was needed. They went with what they thought was needed, but not what I actually needed. And many years ago, I read about a wonderful physician. Some of you may well have come across her. She's called Rachel Naomi Remen. Written a beautiful book, Kitchen Table Wisdom, and another one. And she's a physician who struggled with her own very chronic health difficulties for a long time. And she now teaches other physicians, and she's very interested in the difference between helping, fixing, and service. And for me, they make incredible sense for how we approach the world. Helping, fixing, and service. And in this context, she says, helping is based on inequality. It's not a relationship between equals. When you help, you're using your own strength to help someone who at that moment appears to have less strength. You are the helper, and there is a helpee. There's a helper and a helped, and it's not an equal relationship. She says, when we help, we may inadvertently take away more than we give, diminishing the person's sense of self-worth and self-esteem, and I would say self-agency. Those people who were helping me, I felt diminished by it. It's like, I know what I'm doing, I know what I need, and this is basically interfering with what I know I need to do. So it was such a good example for me. And then she said of fixing, we fix broken pipes. We don't fix people. When I set about fixing another person, it's because I see them as broken. Fixing is a form of judgment that separates us from one another. It creates a distance. If I see you as someone to be fixed, I'm placing myself in a place where A, I think I know what needs fixing, and B, I don't need fixing. Apparently I'm not the broken one, you are. So it's a separation. Again, it's a real sense of separation for me. So helping and fixing locate us in separation. So then what does she see serving as? She says, Now, when I help, I'm very aware of my own strength, but we don't serve from strength. We serve with our whole selves. We serve with our limitations, our experiences, our wounds, our vulnerabilities. Our wholeness serves the wholeness in the other. That we're not here to fix or mend. The wholeness in life, in us, serves the wholeness in the other and the wholeness in life. And that's a phrase that I really love. The wholeness in us serves the wholeness in the other. And we bring all of ourselves to that. When Lingzhao sees her father on the floor, she wants to join him exactly where he is, because there's nothing wrong with where he is. He's just on the floor. There's nothing to mend and nothing to fix and nothing to do, just to be with him exactly where he is. Joan Sutherland, who writes the commentary about this in a beautiful book called The Hidden Lamp, which is stories often involving female Zen practitioners. So they're often old stories. Joan Sutherland says, Lingzhao's action obliterates the idea that there is a helper and a helped. Compassion isn't a commodity we deliver, but a commitment, according to Chan, to help liberate the intimacy already inherent in any situation. We fall down with others to liberate the intimacy inherent in any situation. When we take away a sense of separateness, we're with exactly what is there. Which is very different, I think, often than what we think helping is. If we see serving as liberating the wholeness in the other with the wholeness in ourselves. I was recently in a conversation with someone and we were talking about finding the space inside to be with exactly what something was that was really deeply painful. And it was deeply painful because it was unfixable. There was a situation that was going to unravel, like watching the slow train wreck. And you just got to stay open and tender-hearted to the intimacy of that situation. And it wasn't within the gift or the resources of the person I was talking to change or alter how the other one was. They were going to have to go and just sit with something that was unfolding that was deeply painful. I imagine that's not just this one person who's had that experience. That we've all watched situations unfolding that are out with our capacity. And the world, it's not just in our personal lives, it's our lives in society. We watch things happening. And unlike in The Railway Children, which was one of my favourite stories as a child, we don't get to run on ahead with our little lantern. Stop the train. We have to watch the train crash. And that's a really difficult and painful feeling for us to sit with. And so often it's that feeling of powerlessness that propels us into helping and fixing. It's like, we've got to do something. That momentum, you probably even know it in your body, that urge, to rush and do something, to make something better, to fix something. And what are our choices here? When it's unbearable, what are our choices? We turn away. How many of us have stopped listening to the news? There's real sanity in titrating your exposure to what's going on in the world. But how many of us are completely turning away? Not just people in this room, but in the world. How many of us are just turning away because it's unbearable? To blame the other. She could have said to her father, I told you to tie your shoelaces. I told you the road was rocky here. You weren't paying attention. It's your fault. Or she could have blamed herself. I know he's wobbly on his feet now. I should have carried the bags. I should have taken care. We blame the other, or we blame ourselves, or we blame the world. And Lingzhao doesn't do any of that. She doesn't do any of that. She doesn't blame him. She doesn't blame him herself. She doesn't drag him up by the armpits. She falls down beside him. Again, in her commentary, Joan Sutherland says, usually the most intimate response to another difficulty begins with the willingness not to flee. It just begins with the willingness not to run away. And fleeing can take the form of abandoning the situation, and it can also mean escaping into helping. It's another kind of fleeing, into a whole constellation of ideas about what ought to happen. Intimacy, which is what our Zen practice is essentially about. Intimacy is being willing to stay and accompany and listen, to be vulnerable and surprised and flexible. It's a willingness to fall with someone else and see what becomes possible when we do. What happens if I fall down beside you? I have no idea. Do we help each other up? Do we lie there, start looking at the sky, admire the clouds? What do we do? Something emerges. Something possible emerges. And how many times have we tripped over our own shoelaces? There's something about this inner helping, the outer thing that Lingzhao falls down beside the other. But I'm really curious about our internal world. What do we do when we are in that unfixable place in ourselves? What do we do when we're in that powerless place in ourselves? Do we turn away? Do we distract? Do we find ways to lie down beside ourselves and just see what wants to happen? Or do we rush about, fixing things or blaming the other or blaming ourselves? It's that internal world and our external world are no different. I always say we've had cats for a long time, and I always think, if you see a cat fall off something, or make a mistake. Cats don't make mistakes. But, if they do something that could be construed by the other as a mistake, they're always like, nothing to see here. Just do some little... Just lick my paws and look like I was completely in charge of that. And we live on a street with very uneven road outside, and we do occasionally see people fall in the road. And they bounce, it's like, doesn't matter what age they are. They kind of bounce up and there's like, nothing to see here. And it's such a human response. And it's what we do outside, and it's what we do inside. Nothing to see here. That was too difficult to stay with. I'm going to run away from that one. And of course, this is absolutely not an invitation to inaction. It is not just to lie down there forever. It's not to do nothing. It's to see what emerges as a possibility. If I take space and time to be intimate with what's here, what actually emerges as a possibility? And going back to my conversation with this person who was going to face some horrible, unfixable situation, it called to mind for me the images of koan, which is one of the kind of Buddhist representations of a particular aspect of how we can be in the world. And she's called often the goddess of suffering, or the Buddha of suffering. And the name that she goes by is she who hears the cries of the world. She who hears the cries of the world, not she who rushes round fixing things, not she who has the answer to every problem, not she who makes things happen. The goddess of compassion, the Buddha of compassion, hears the cries of the world. She opens herself up to hear all the cries of the world and stay steady and intimate in the face of that. And she pours. She's often, there's a small one on the table back there, and she's often shown with a sort of vase which she's pouring the waters of compassion into the river of life. Just the simple waters of compassion into the river of life. And she's often also shown with a willow, a branch of willow, which is kind of like bending and flexible. That's what she is, bending and flexible and pouring the waters of compassion into the river of life. So that's what we're kind of invited to do. You know, we're invited to increase our capacity to hear our inner cries, to hear the cries of our own suffering, to witness those, and also the outer cries of the world, and to stay intimate, to stay close. And sometimes watch some really bad telly. You know, go dancing, have a cup of tea, eat a piece of cake, I don't know, whatever your version of managing yourself. But coming back again and again to listening to the cries of the world. Charlotte Joko Beck, who's also in our lineage, said, what makes it unbearable, i.e. life, what makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured. What makes life unbearable is our mistaken belief that it can be cured. Not just lived with and lived through and lived with kindness and lived with connection. And as I was writing about all of this, there was a word that kept coming to me, which was fearless. Lingzhao didn't hesitate about how she would look or what she needed to do. She just went and lay down. And interestingly, Layman Pang's words to her were, luckily no one was looking. And what's really interesting for me is in this context, he doesn't mean anything about shame or about being belittled by the other, you know, or being judged by the other. It's like nobody was there to look. Just two beings without a self-commentary doing what they were doing. It's the self-commentary that's often the person looking. Isn't it? How many of you have, you know, does my bum look big in this? You know, whatever version of that is, what will people think of me if I cough, if I have to leave the room? You know, what will people think of me rather than, I'm coughing, I'm going to leave the room. Because it's the appropriate thing to do. How do we live our lives as though no one's looking? Including our own judgmental self-commentary. And we can throw ourselves down beside people. We can look crazy. We can look exactly how we look. You don't have to be mortified. Joan Sutherland says, Layman Pang's final remark does not mean that he's worried about some third person judging the event. The one who fortunately isn't looking is ourselves. That is our inner tendency to monitor and pass judgment, distancing us from our interactions, even as they're happening. And I'm sure every single person in this room will know that feeling of being caught in the self-consciousness. We have some of us will have been where we do ceremonies. We do more elaborate ceremonies than this one that we do of opening the Zendo. And because we're not a monastic setting and we only do them like once a year, we have to practice. The practices are hilarious. Everybody is gripped with self-consciousness. That, you mean it really is a version of does my bum look big in this? It's like, you know, I feel so stupid twirling this staff, you know, I feel ridiculous doing this. And then, and I think it's probably been the experience for everybody I've talked to who's engaged in these ceremonies, it's when you do it without that kind of self-consciousness of the practice, you unfold in the moment. Something carries you along, and there is a way in which you feel embodied in the practice. And it's so different. It's such a different experience. I would invite anyone to do any of the practices in that kind of like, what's it like if I'm just in the flow of this crazy walking? You know, what's it like if I just do this without that self-commentary? How free it is when we're not keeping score. How potentially generous is a life that's lived without someone looking. When we're just in the moment offering what we offer. And it doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that we forget to light the candle or do the incense the wrong way. But it's like there is a real feeling of like it doesn't matter. Like it really doesn't matter. What matters is our attention and presence. And that's true for life. What matters is our intention and presence. Joan Sutherland says, when Lingzhao throws herself down, her kindness is clear and unhesitating, completely without self-concern. It's also funny. It's a funny thing to do. And she says, those are all the qualities of enlightenment. That we do things without too much self-concern, and often it's pretty funny. It's not that serious. It really isn't. It's just crazy life unfolding. This is what it looks like when all the energy bound up in the small story we're constantly telling ourselves in our reactions and opinions and judgments has been liberated into awakening. It's a free place, and Lingzhao lived there to the end. What time am I meant to finish?
22.
Oh, good.
Plenty of time.
Good. So just there's a poem before I tell you the final little Lingzhao story. So this is a poem by a wonderful poet called Audre Lorde, who was an activist and a writer and a thinker, lived a beautiful, troubled, complicated, free life. She says, and she knew she was dying, I want to live the rest of my life, however long or short, with as much sweetness as I can decently manage, loving all the people I love and doing as much as I can of the work I still have to do. I'm going to write fire until it comes out of my ears, my eyes, my nose holes, everywhere, until it's every breath I breathe. I'm going to write fire until it comes out of my ears, my eyes, my nose holes, everywhere, until it's every breath I breathe. I'm going to go out like a fucking meteor. That's courage. That's living a life with some fearlessness in it. And the final story. It's also about fearlessness, and it's called Lingzhao Goes First. So Layman Pang lived to a good, ripe old age, and one of the marks of kind of Zen practice is that people who are really embodying the practice can apparently choose their own time to die. So it's seen as a real conscious dropping of the body. It's like you go in your own time when you decide. And Layman Pang got to the age where he decided, I'm going to drop my body, it's time. So he thought he wanted to do it on a really auspicious time. So he told his daughter, Lingzhao, that that's what he was going to do. And he said he went into his room and he sat on his pallet that he had ready to die. And so he was all ready. And he said to Lingzhao, go outside and look and say, when the sun has reached its zenith, when it's exactly noon, call to me and tell me. So he was going to do it at that moment. So Lingzhao waits by the door and she looks up and she waits until it's exactly noon. And then she says, the sun has reached its zenith, but there's an eclipse. And Layman Pang was like, oh, I must see the eclipse. So he rushes out to look at the non-existent eclipse. Apparently death could wait. And while he was looking at that, Lingzhao went and sat on his pallet and dropped her body. She died. And he smiled, and he looked at his daughter, and he said, my daughter has gone again ahead of me once more. And he lived for another 7 days. And then he dropped his body. What a weird story. Isn't that extraordinary? It's like, his beloved daughter, was she preempting him? Was she, it's like, what was that about? What a fascinating idea that she dropped her body before his. And like many of these stories, we can come back again and again to the different layers inside them. But I was struck by that his daughter kind of tricked him into, like, you're not that ready to die, old man. You're still interested in the eclipse. And he didn't wail. He didn't rebuke her. He didn't rebuke himself. He smiled. And he honoured what was true, that his daughter had gone ahead of him again. This daughter was as much of a teacher as Layman Pang ever was. Catherine Jeno Pages says in her reflection, when I first read this story, I found it rather puzzling. It seemed to be praising a voluntary death and perhaps a competition between the two over who would die first. But then I saw with a deep resonance that these two people had no fear. No fear of death and no fear of life. They were free. It was just freedom. And in a way, that's the essential function of our practice, to allow us to be fully here, fully in this life, fully embracing our lives exactly as they are. To stop thinking that there's something broken, there's something need to fix, there's something that we're doing wrong, like someone else we need to be. When I started the day and I said, we're all Buddhas sitting here. We are all Buddhas sitting here. There is nowhere else to sit. And if we weren't gripped by our fears of doing it wrong or doing it right or not being enough or not belonging or whatever storylines we run for decades, whatever those storylines are, we're just here, exactly and precisely as we are. And in a way, it's like, I don't imagine that we live without fear, but what would it be like living without fear and carrying on? Living with fear and carrying on. Finding those moments of freedom. To keep falling through life. That there's nothing broken and nothing to fix. And to serve life. To serve life, the whole of life, with as much compassion and fearlessness as we could muster. There's a word I've been really enjoying apart from the fearlessness, which is metabolizing. To take in our life, to digest it and metabolize it and make it fully us. That's what metabolization does. It takes our life and it makes it fully us. Scottish poet Kathleen Jamie says, if we're to endure, which we do, then let it be like this, not with a clenched fist, but a steady breath, and the earth beneath us holding on. If we're to endure, then let it be like this, not with a clenched fist, but a steady breath, and the earth beneath us holding on. And just one last poem from Anak Tmova, who's living through war. If all who have begged help from me in this world, all the holy innocents, broken wives and cripples, the imprisoned, the suicidal, if they had sent me 1 kopeck, I should have become richer than all Egypt. But they did not send me kopecks. Instead, they shared with me their strength. So nothing in the world is stronger than I, and I can bear anything, even this. They didn't send me their kopecks. They shared their strength. They lay down beside her. And with all of us doing that, we can bear it. So, thank you very much.